And that first visit really was that. It was just like this kind of storied land, and you're walking around and looking at things, and it was meaningful. It had a feeling to it that drew me back. But the second time I had a little more intelligence. In other words, I talked to more people when I was here. Somehow I had lucked into, and I don't even know where I got them, but I had some handwritten directions to Junior Kimbrough's Juke Joint that I mentioned earlier. And that was really when the light went on. It's like, wait a second, this music is still alive within its own culture, African-American culture in Mississippi.
And we're live today on Imagine Fitting It podcast with Roger Stolle. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure, my friend. Talking off camera, we soon to discover and realize without even knowing that you're actually also a fellow Daytonian.
That's right, Dayton, Ohio.
We're gonna have to get more into that. Mississippi blues guy. All right, I'm really excited to hear about this journey. Roger, basically, like to start like a little bit like what keeps you busy these days, and kind of what's your focus?
So it's hard to jump into the sort of end of that. In a way, but the reason I am in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and if folks don't know where that is, we're about 90 minutes south of Memphis, Tennessee, and Clarksdale is as close as you can get to sort of the beginnings of the blues and a place you can actually visit and experience it. And the reason I'm here is not just to have a store, which I do have, called Cathead. The reason I moved here almost 24 years ago, I had a mission and still do to help organize and promote the blues from within. Essentially take my extreme blues music fandom and history, interest, and blend it with my background, which was more in marketing and advertising, and sort of organize things so then we can promote it. Because back then, 24 years ago, there wasn't enough here to visit and experience other than just see. You could see history, but you couldn't experience it. So we needed to sort of turn that up, organize it, and then we could sort of push it out to the world.
Really? Now, I have to ask you, was there a moment, or was this some kind of long yearning and like you found the blues, and how that transpired? Like all of a sudden you found this mission in terms of the initial.
So sure. So it goes back to Dayton, Ohio. I can even tell you August 17th, 1977. I was 10 years old. That's the day after Elvis Presley died. And as you'll know, there were two newspapers, a morning, Dayton Journal-Herald, and then there was the Dayton Daily News at night back then.
I was an honor carrier at Dayton Daily News 4 years.
There you go. There you go. I think I substituted for some people. But basically that entire week, both newspapers had Elvis, on the front cover, on the front page. It was everywhere. The music was on the PA system at stores. It was on the radio. There were all these movies and concerts playing on TV. And some of it spoke to me. Now, my parents didn't really play music. My mom was always busy just dealing with my sister and me and life. And my dad, was in the midst of actually working on the desegregation of the Dayton public schools at that time.
Oh, wow.
So, just a lot was going on to where music wasn't a thing. And he listened to talk radio, really AM talk radio. Anyway, so I hear some of this Elvis, and some of it really speaks to me. So I start saving my 50 cents a week allowance, 5 cents for every year old I was. And we'd go to either Reich's, which was a regional department store chain, or
my mom worked for that store.
Yeah. Or Sears. And I think they both had little record departments at the time. So I'm not sure which one I favored, but I would buy these little 45 RPM records or reissues of particularly the early RCA, or even once I realized about the Sun sessions, for Elvis. But at any rate, I still have those records. They're all blues records. I just didn't know it. That's the Elvis I liked. It wasn't,
right.
Vegas, Hollywood. It was Memphis, Tupelo,
Early.
So I got into blues music through the back door. Well, eventually I figure out that A, he didn't start it. And B, it's the voice of a culture. It is a genre of music where you file things in a record store, but it's the voice of a culture. It came from a people and a place and a time that was, oftentimes very oppressive. But it's also very joyful and celebrational music. It's not a protest music so much as a survival music. And it just various levels. Somehow I could relate to this, even coming from Dayton, Ohio. So that, sort of got me into the blues. And then as I got a little bit older and could go out and see shows, it was amazing how Dayton, which is a crossroads, I-70 and 75,
Oh,
how
absolutely.
quickly, during the week it would get pickup dates. So like Buddy Guy, guys like that would come through in the 1980s,
Wow.
and they'd play because they were going somewhere that would make money, but they did a pickup date in Dayton. And then, well, Buddy Guy in particular, I got into him in like the late 1980s, I guess. And it was kind of crazy because he'd play Dayton and then either Columbus or Cincinnati. So I could go see him 2 nights in a row. But started out doing that.
I will tell you that huge Buddy Guy fan. I actually moved to Chicago in '84, and soon there, most of every weekend was either at the Kingston Blues or the Kingston Mines or the Blues Club right across the street from it. And then it was probably, like I would say, like near the early '90s, I think, when he opened his own place or near there.
Yeah, 754 South Wabash.
Yeah, he is phenomenal. I mean, I saw him 3 times and just amazing. The last time, you'll appreciate this, and we'll get going here. New York City, small venue, and he's literally, right, he does his traditional jamming, comes off a small stage already, and walks up to our booths and is literally singing with spotlights. And it was so intimate. It was so unbelievable. Such an entertainer.
Well, and a real torchbearer for the blues. He learned that kind of thing, going out into the audience with his guitar, first with a long guitar cord, later with, the use of electronics, remote stuff. But, he learned that from seeing guys like Guitar Slim, who would do it back in the 50s.
Right.
And so he sort of carried that on. And then everybody from Jimi Hendrix to the young man Kingfish, who's from here in Clarksdale, sort of picked those kind of things up from him. And here it is, he's kind of the last man standing. He's 89 years old.
Yes.
He's still on his final tour. After like 3 years, he's on his final tour still. So,
God bless.
folks should go out and see Buddy Guy if he comes to their town.
God bless him. So we know you're from Dayton. So tell me, what were your parents? Was your mother, stay-at-home mom like my mom was for the most part? And what'd your dad do?
Yeah, so my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She had worked actually as like a secretary, in the 50s before they got married. And my dad started out as a history teacher, elementary school, I assume. I guess it was elementary school, but history teacher in the late 50s, but kept going to school and became a principal at multiple schools in the 1960s in the Dayton public school system. And by the 70s, he had moved on up into school administration. And Dayton was tasked by the courts with court-ordered desegregation of the public schools. And so my dad is white, very white like me, or was, but his partner, African-American Bill Scott, the two of them worked together to write the plan to desegregate the Dayton public schools.
Wow.
And it had to involve busing. Busing. There was really no way around it.
Right.
And, some of that was more successful than others in the end, but they had to do it. And in fact, I remember my dad telling the story of he and Bill Scott, they went and met with the judge who had been court ordered, and told the judge that the superintendent, their boss, is like, you know what? We just can't do this. It's too much effort. It's going to cost too much money. It's not that we don't want to try to do this, but we can't fully achieve this. And the judge said, well, I can either lock you up now or you can go back and tell him you're going to do this, is that kind of thing.
Wow.
My dad, he was working a lot. He was very stressed out. And in fact, they brought in an expert, and the expert got assassinated right after a meeting my dad was in.
My goodness.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I actually found it online in old Dayton Daily News newspapers because I just always remembered it. He came home that night.
This was an expert aside from Bill Scott and your dad. There was an expert where did he come from? The government, or where did he come from?
I'm not sure where he came from, but he'd worked in some bigger cities on desegregation.
Goodness.
And he was an expert, a consultant. They brought him in, and an angry parent, came in and killed him because of what he was trying to do.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember my dad coming home that night, and he had a series of Volkswagen Beetles. So it may have been the 1968, or it may have been I don't know if it would have been the 74. I'm not sure what year that happened, but at any rate, you could hear him come in and set the parking brake in our garage. There's a little tiny ranch, and our dining room was just inside the door from the garage. So you'd hear it come in, Volkswagen Beetle. You'd hear him set that brake, and you're like, okay, we're sitting there waiting for dinner, until he walks in because he's late. And I just remember he walked in, and I may get choked up. He just tells my mom, looks past us and looks at my mom and says, they killed him. And it's like, I didn't know what that meant. It took,
Wow.
But it was like stunning that was happening in your town.
Right. And so intimate right to your dinner table, and you're going to get that kind of, right. And seeing that kind of, that transfer of information from your parents, right in the most intimate part of your home. Wow.
Sure.
Wow.
The other thing I will say is I feel super fortunate because I have encountered people in life who didn't have this experience. I always had Black friends. I mean, I was always just it. So you grew up with something, and everybody is obviously, as they are, the same, whatever you want to say, different backgrounds,
right,
and experiences. But I feel really fortunate for that. So that probably helped to lead me to an interest in, African American culture, particularly when it comes to music and the South. So, my dad, in various ways, whether he was present in the room sometimes or not, I feel like he really influenced me, or helped me, in life.
Sure. I mean, I will tell you personally, I went to John H. Patterson. And, at the time it was, and my sister was in the desegregation, and she experienced that directly. I went to John H. Patterson, which was it was downtown the city. And, this is just a young Catholic boy, not much experience outside of that, and being sent down sent to Dayton proper, Dayton City, and going to a school that was 70-30. It was African American, or at time Black, 70, and white. Everything else was white. So it was like all of a sudden I had, similar to you, I had this profound experience because up to that time, I knew what I knew. And the one thing I will tell you, Roger, that I like sharing this every time I talk to people, is that there are white a-holes and they are Black a-holes,
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And the integrity of a person has nothing to do with his skin. It's just it was so both scary, but then it slowly unfolded to I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan. That path of that different, cutting that new path where you're not just going to go and stay in this kind of pristine, controlled environment. You're going to step out. And that, I will tell you, was the best education in my life. And to this day, I mean, we all have a handful of dear, dear friends. And we all have very, very many hands full of friends that were, right, we know, whatever. And I can tell you, then I went off. And in terms of the blues, as you're such a passionate caretaker and promoter, which is phenomenal, is that story, like I grew up and once I heard Led Zeppelin, I was like done. And then all that years, I didn't realize where they were getting influence, how they got influenced through Muddy Waters and all the blues, until I moved to Chicago. And so I got my education oh no, this is where stuff has been, channeled up from the South, because all of those players that you're speaking of from down there, right? They, they made their way to the North and industrial, whatever, the industrial age and all that kind of stuff. So tell me, wow, this is definitely some profound experiences for you. And what do do you have memories? Did you have any memories you wanted to be a kid even before this? Or was this how old were you? Do you remember when you got that news, or oh, that's right. How old were you when you heard that Elvis stuff? 77.
So I was 10 years old.
Okay.
I was 10 years old. He died in August. I was born in April. So I was 10, in a few months.
Okay.
And this happened the desegregation, that whole situation in Dayton was happening before that, in the couple years leading up to that, I'd say.
Yeah.
But, it's just a lot going on. And, I think, I was not the best student. I always, I always talked too much in class.
That's me.
Yeah. And, always the report card said, I forget how they worded it, but basically you're not living up to your potential and this kind of thing. So, there were stresses
Yeah.
involved with all that. And ironically, here it is, my dad is an educator, and I'm kind of the bad student. And of course, my sister was the perfect student, So
There's, I think there just always needs to be that yin and yang. And, I have to do a shout out because if you see this artwork in the back here, if I swing some way, there's a cross up in the back, and that represents my Roman Catholic upbringing. The yin and yang below is a fusion of my father, who also grew up Roman Catholic, but he found Eastern philosophy at a certain age, and I think it was around when he was trying to understand and deal with other resources of dealing with raising 4 kids.
it's a
So,
lot.
and my father was heavily involved in the aviation and space program for the first Apollo mission. So, but that being said, you got drawn to Delta blues. What a sound, a story of, it's a story you couldn't shake. Like it must have did it stick sometime then? And when did it reappear?
So, when you talk about blues with particularly older musicians, they're just trying to explain it. They talk a lot about feeling and how it feels and how it, makes you feel. And that's the best way I can explain what got me into that music. Because initially, even when I bought my first Muddy Waters record, which is the first actual blues album I bought, I still didn't really know why it appealed to me, why I was being drawn to that. And my friends were not, at that time really into that kind of music. So I only had a couple I could drag to go see things, hear things. But I just kept getting further and further into it, trying to find any books I could find, which were a little challenging, pre-internet for one thing, but also, Dayton, Ohio is not the hub of where you would think you'd have blues books. So whatever the library had, I'd get. Anytime I could find usually a used bookstore might have something that was a blues book. And I just kept trying to gain knowledge about it. A little bit later then, in 1991, Deep Blues. It's a film documentary. I totally recommend it for folks. It's out there somewhere streaming, I'm sure. Bob Muggy is this director who came through in 1990 and started in Memphis, went through the North Mississippi Hill Country region, Mississippi Delta, where I'm sitting, a little bit south of here, to Bentonia, Mississippi, and filmed the best of what was still there. Juke joints and blues musicians and stories. And it's a quirky film, but it's amazing. And I was already a blues fan, but seeing that, and it's like, wait a second. So some of that's still happening in Mississippi. So it just sort of filed it in the back of my head. I don't know if I really thought I'm going to drop everything and go to Mississippi, because I was in the midst of trying to, make a living and all that.
Right.
But it sort of was in the back of my head then. So it's a pivotal thing, even though I didn't react from it immediately. But so that was 91, within 5 years for sure, I was sitting in actually it was a different juke joint, but it was the one he had currently. One of the juke joints that was featured there, Junior Kimbrough in Chulahoma, Mississippi, which I'm not even sure if there's a town. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But I was sitting there with the guy I had seen in this documentary who was, just, I don't want to say a nobody. He wasn't like a pop star. He didn't tour, didn't have, massive commercial releases. So he was just the guy keeping the blues alive in his little community and teaching his kids all to play this music as well. So that was another one of those really pivotal moments that that's the one that kept me coming back to Mississippi.
So did you when you were living in Dayton, you'd go down there for trips and visit and get a fix and come back, and it slowly turned that direction where you're at now?
So I guess I should talk about timeline a little bit. So I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, went to school, University of Cincinnati, went back to Dayton, stumbled into advertising by accident, honestly, as a copywriter. So I just started that trajectory for a career. But as I grew as a blues fan and was able to travel more and things, really where I went was Chicago, going to see, the Kingston Mines and Blues Chicago, and when Buddy Guy's opened, and, places like that to see the blues, because from most of what you saw and read and heard, that's where the blues was now coming out of the
Right.
most. And a lot of them were still the Great Migration blues players who came from the South, primarily Mississippi, and ended up there. Or it was their sort of offspring, who maybe were born there, but they had Mississippi roots through their family. So that's what would be my blues fix. Southwest airline, maybe. I don't know, whatever. Fly into, and take the train or whatever, and just try to have a blues weekend and then go back and face the office on Monday.
It's so funny you're saying that, a blues fix and go for the, whatever. I just sent messages to my dear. I lived there 21 years, and I just sent a message to my dear friends to say I'm actually need a Chicago fix, and hit the blues. So you left a corporate career, right, to chase the music that you kind of like. Obviously, it moved your soul.
So first, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to get the timeline right because I may not have been clear. So I'm in Dayton. I work my way up within advertising and retail setting, and got recruited for a job in St. Louis, Missouri in February 1995. I moved for that job February 3rd, actually, started on the 5th. And so I'm there in St. Louis now, which has two great blues things about it. It's on the Great Migration Trail. So you had guys like Henry Townsend and Big George Brock and Arthur Williams, these real deal blues artists who didn't make it to Chicago. They stopped there because they found work in the 50s or 60s.
Wow, that's great.
So there's that. And then, I swear this is true, it had not really occurred to me how close St. Louis was to Mississippi until I, looked at a map basically after moving. And it's like, well, 5 hours, you're in Mississippi. So, and I'm going to use some air quotes here, but basically I came down on the Dead Man Blues tour because I thought it was all gone.
Oh.
I thought maybe I'll find something, but it seemed like it was going to be pretty quiet.
Right.
So I really came to see where, my heroes were born or buried. At that time, there was a tiny little Delta Blues Museum and upstairs in the Carnegie Public Library. Just one little room, didn't have a whole lot of stuff here in Clarksdale. But, so there wasn't much. And that first visit really was that. It was just like this kind of storied land, and you're walking around and looking at things. And, it was meaningful. It had a feeling to it that drew me back. But the second time I had a little more intelligence. In other words, I talked to more people when I was here. Somehow I had lucked into, and I don't even know where I got them, but I had some handwritten directions to Junior Kimbrough's Juke Joint that I mentioned earlier. And that was really when the light went on. It's like, wait a second, this music is still alive within its own culture, African-American culture in Mississippi. It's just not music, and it's not marketed because it's not the pop music. So it's sort of a happenstance, kind of living below the radar kind of music.
Right.
And that's, I think, probably when the thought started churning in my head. Now, they took another half decade to come out because I didn't move here until 2002. But basically, I just kept looking at it and thinking, well, I want more of those experiences. I want to get to know more of the people behind this music. And so trying to spend more and more time down here and getting to know those guys like, Chief Model Ford, a real storied character, ultimately married 6 times, served time on a chain gang for killing the guy.
Oh, goodness.
Didn't start playing guitar until he was 58, made it to possibly 93 years old. Just real characters that you could just spend forever with because the stories and just the sayings. So I kept coming for all that, and slowly, now look, I own some guitars. I'm definitely not a guitarist, so I'm not a musician, in other words.
Right.
So, you kind of have to get in where you fit in, figure out what can you add to this puzzle? What can you do that actually would help all this? It's like, well, I know how to organize and promote,
Sure.
and I know about music and the history. I want to learn more. So I moved here with that mission to help organize and promote the blues from within right here in Clarksdale, Mississippi, which, Clarksdale and the plantations that once surrounded it, that's where, Muddy Waters came from, or at least grew up. Sam Cooke's from here, Ike Turner.
Wow.
I always say the good Ike Turner. He didn't turn bad till East St. Louis, from what I can tell.
Okay.
But, John Lee Hooker's from real close to here. So like you had all this history.
Right.
Then you also had musicians walking around. They just weren't playing as much as, we might think they should. So that's part of the mission has been to try to fix that problem.
I have to say that it's quite magical. And there's just I think there's a huge underlying message here that I'm a big believer in, obviously as young kids and as young people and as even as we get into adulthood and we're constantly growing and things are constantly changing. And there's certain things that come across us that will move us, inspire us, that we will like sometimes some to a degree of we don't even know it's actually still there permeating. And to me, it goes back to like I've said this repeatedly on my podcast. I believe that the education system is so archaic and it's not only its methodology, but its focus on what they offer in terms of really empowering kids when they're very young, obviously when they can first comprehend and have a sense of responsibility to really identify their passions at that moment. Like if you gave me, right, if we had to study history, we can blanket like all the top things that we should really know about. And then can I personally do a historical biography on, like you as a young kid, like the blues and the history. And at the time, it may be like people are looking sideways, like, well, no, that's not what's on our curriculum. And it's not right. It's not supposedly what the norm is or what we justify as a proper education. And so I think it's a huge one in terms of, I tell you, I've followed my passion and I wanted my life to be as joyous and fulfilled to whatever degree I struggled. It's my struggle and I controlled it. And I made decisions, right? Some good, some not so good in terms of the overall picture. But in essence, I think it's kind of one of the things that I think is critical to be aware of educators. And again, my podcast is dedicated to my late nephew, who we lost to addiction and distraction and all sorts of reasons. But, basically it's a mental health issue where if you are not recognized and being able to kind of like nurture just little nuggets, and I think between those little nuggets of potential inspiration by a mentor, right? Say, no, you don't want to do that, but we can definitely push the envelope over here, but we got to keep on track here. So again, I'm going off on I'm not going to say my tangent because this is the mission of my podcast. I want to highlight the importance of mentors and passion, right? And like being able, no matter how old or young we are, right? I consider myself being mentored by you right now because it doesn't matter what age anybody is. It's this transfer of ideas and feelings and truth. And I think the truth really matters so much on an individual level that when especially now these days, we can, we're not even go that conversation, but that raw, organic truth of essence of who we are and as the work you're doing as a community there is amazing. So I applaud you for that. Very applaud you. So,
and I would jump on what you're saying too, whether it's a kid, we'll say in school, and you're like trying to find a way to connect, like, well, what is your interest? And maybe we can work from there. But I think that's the same with today with adults, finding there's some way to connect with almost everybody. And sometimes you've got to, I don't want to say ignore certain things, whatever. Some things you're just not going to agree about, but there's always stuff we can relate to. And music is great for that. That's a big tent that can hold a lot of people. And even something like blues music, per se, the genre, there's everything from the broken guitar on the front porch acoustic all the way up to, blues rock. There's soul blues. So there's something for everybody. And what I've found here working in this environment is that, you can use that as sort of the foot in the door to get enough trust so you can have, bigger conversations about things. And people may or may not change their minds about bigger issues in the world, but at least it gets you to where you can be standing together and you're not boxing, you're talking,
Yeah, you're creating a neutral, approachable, really fun gray area. It's in the middle that we have this balance. And so my moniker, Roger, in the fitness business, I'm a 34-year industry balance expert. I've refined. I'm so creative that, and again, I go back to when you said music is that thing that bring people together. And you can always also throw in talk about like a different country's food and their artwork, because
Sure.
that is the culture, right? That's a raw living.
Anything creative.
Yes, all the raw living things that make up life, right? I mean, what do you do when you go to vacation? You're going to go out and have a nice dinner somewhere. You're going to go see something that's creative, a performance, or you're going to hear some music, and you're going to want to hear people that are still on track with their true nature and creating tones and vibrations, either sitting on your seat or hearing the sizzling smells of a steak or a food that you've never experienced. So, I've been to 34 countries in my life. I've lived in 3 major cities in the United States. And I've spent time in these major cities in Europe and whatever, various places. And it's just so, like, that's one message I want to like give to my younger listeners, that, it's yours to explore and decipher. Don't stop short of looking, don't of staying in a box. And you are definitely, again, I applaud you, because it is just so wonderful for you to see it, recognize it, and pull the trigger. Now, the Delta Blues. So I think people know what do you call it? The general term of the blues. And it tells the stories of pain, perseverance, and hope. So, blues in general, why do you think that the theme still resonates so deeply today? And or is there any variation of how the Delta blues is a little bit that's own unique place and where it came from?
Well, Delta blues, of course, like in an academic sense, would be described probably as pre-World War II, acoustic, perhaps played with a slide on a guitar, like a metal tube or a glass bottle or a bottleneck. But to me, it's more of the music and the culture that came out of here, the Mississippi Delta, which is it's an alluvial plain flattened out by the Mississippi River over the eons. And so it's flat, very flat. And the soil is just, particularly back in the day before we started farming, it was just naturally so, had so many nutrients. It was just dark and it was great for growing anything. And of course, cotton was king at the time. But because of that is why we ended up with all of these cotton plantations surrounding the town that became Clarksdale. And this is where the blues, along with the gospel side of it on Sunday, but that's where it grew up. Who knows who played that first note and where that was, but it was the pop music of the day. And you had early Delta bluesmen. One of the first important ones, certainly to record, was Charlie Patton, who, famously had, he had a lot of ladies in his life through the years, and he was known to get in the occasional brawl, fight at juke joints, and be found running down the road trying to escape a crowd at the juke joint. And he lived off and on down on Dockery Plantation, but also in our county as well.
So I have to say a comment, because I thought about when you mentioned gospel, and this is when you mentioned like, I talked a lot, I wasn't a good student, whatever, just if it's distraction. And I just created this theory now that because I used to play hooky from church when you were a little radical, free spirit thinking minded, right? And it's like, was it you? Did you comprehend enough or that organized religion or message at the time? And was your independent spirit so strong beyond any recognizability of your own inner control, where you're going to Sunday, gospel, and you're running off and playing another version of that connection to your world? And is that like raw ruckus? So, like you said, right? This guy that's out just on the run and cutting that path of like, no, there's something more. And, because the blues is about perseverance and pain and experience and culture, right? And obviously there's no question about where it stemmed from, right? And that the hardship and the reality, we can't change what's going down. But man, I just really appreciate your efforts to highlight, educate, and inspire people to look back. Because, if you don't really understand and appreciate your history, chances are you're going to repeat some things that you're really not, end up going to be regretting. So let me ask you, like, how would you explain blues to young people? That it just isn't old music. Like it's a living history and a human emotion.
Well, it is a challenge. My customer demographic, for example, that comes to our festivals we put on or walks into my blues store, Cathead, it is graying. It's looking more like us and older. So that is the trick. Like, how do you interest younger folks in what seems like such an archaic music? And even here, if a young African American kid walks in my store, well, to him, blues is something like his grandparents listened to. So there is that going into it, just knowing, kind of, okay, well, that's where they're kind of coming from. What has been interesting, in a couple ways. So blues has evolved into this wide genre. So again, if somebody says they don't like blues, I'm like, well, do you like music?
Wow. Just a little break here. Another great episode. I hope you are enjoying Imagine Fitting In podcast. And just a reminder here, please remember to hit the subscribe button because we love to feel you a part of our Imagine Fitting In family. And if you want to become a brand ambassador, we'd love it if you would share this link on social media, through your email, all your friends. You can help with us with donations, any small donation, big or large, whatever you can manage, to help encourage us and support our efforts here. And you'll find that link in the show notes. And finally, again, a reminder, please refer guests to us. You can find me and contact me at thebalanceprofessor@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. All right. So I hope you continue enjoying Imagine Fitting In. All right. Till next time.
Because if you like music, I'm pretty sure there's some blues for you. Now, if you need it to be completely computerized or whatever, or, super ultra modern, maybe not so much, but anything shy of that. One thing that has been super interesting this year, are you familiar with the Sinners film, the movie, Ryan Coogler?
I have heard that title. I can't say that I've actually seen it. It's out now
Well,
or just out
that's
recently?
right. So it came out, like the end of April, and Ryan Coogler directed Black Panther, which was
Sure.
huge for Warner Brothers. They've made billions off him at this point. So they basically said, yeah, you want to make a blues movie based in Clarksdale that has vampires? Sure.
Oh,
$90 million making a movie. They didn't actually film it here, but it's set in Clarksdale, Mississippi, 1932.
wow.
And it is now, and you can fact check me on this, but this week I've had two people tell me this, but it's now the highest grossing horror film of all time. Now that
Wow.
sounds huge, so I haven't had a chance to fact check that. But the point is, it's huge, like $400 million. Yeah, $400 million worldwide so far.
Yes.
But what I'm getting at is, when I first saw it, in press, there's all kinds of little great blues factoids and things that he absolutely got right. The story behind Ryan Coogler doing a movie like this, he grew up in Oakland, California. That's where he's from. But he had an uncle from Mississippi who lived out there. And that was his favorite uncle. He'd go visit him and hear stories about blues in Mississippi and juke joints. So it was always in his head. He wanted to do something. He just didn't know what. And one day the light switch went on. It's like, well, of course, vampires and, So he came and did research here. So he got a lot of things right. But I'm not a big horror film person. I'll just be honest. And so, I went and was like, wow, if there weren't the vampires, this would be great, is what I'm thinking in my head. And I told that to some customers about a week later in my store. And they said, if there weren't vampires, nobody would be seeing it. I'm like,
Right.
you're kind of right.
Yeah.
So that gets back to your question about young folks. So because it's a more modernistic approach to the soundtrack in a way, but it's definitely blues, but it sort of showcases the survival skills of African Americans at that time. Also, the sort of the culture of the juke joint is very much like the culture of today's, rock and roll or hip hop or whatever. In terms of, there's a lot of attitude there, and the musicians, in many cases, at least the guys are, playing this music to attract the girls, that kind of thing. A lot of things to relate to.
Some things never change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think that's kind of universal. But what's been interesting is two things. First off, you go to a blues festival these days in most parts of the world, and most of the folks look like us. They are white, or at least they're not African American. Because again, the generations, younger generations have had less and less interest in blues.
Right.
This movie has sort of flipped the script. And in many ways, the biggest fans seem to be folks who are from the same culture as the people in the movie. And that's been fascinating. But also younger folks are relating to it.
That's wonderful.
And Warner Brothers actually came and set up a little IMAX thing for us and showed it for 6 free screenings over 3 days.
Wow.
And seeing who came to that was fascinating, particularly locals, because you had it skewed overall, I'd say skewed relatively younger. And of course, we are a mostly African-American county here, but normally for a blues show, you wouldn't necessarily see that if it were a traditional blues show.
Right.
But you did see it for the movie. So my hope is that projects like that, almost taking the vampires and saying, okay, well, let's trick people into being interested in blues. It's that kind of a thought process. We do something similar in a way, it occurs to me, with our Juke Joint Festival, which is our biggest blues festival we do. It's every April. And in the beginning, we were trying to think, well, how can we get locals who say they don't like blues or they don't want to come out to a blues festival to come to a blues festival? A, for the music, but B, because we attract folks from all over the world. I mean, we had 26 international countries here this year for the festival. So my thought initially was, well, I'd seen racing pigs at a carnival thing up in Indiana. Let's have racing pigs. Who doesn't want to see a pig race? It's like universal. So then about 3 years later, we find out there's a guy in Pontotoc, Mississippi, probably the only place it's legal, who has taught monkeys to ride dogs and the dogs herd sheep.
My gosh.
Get a phone number. We're going to get them. But the beauty beyond the craziness of that is that you can say you don't want to see it. Everybody wants to see that. So you end up with locals of all demographics and ages standing right next to people from France and Argentina and whatever.
Wonderful.
And they hear that accent. And their Southern hospitality here it's a real thing.
Yes.
It's possible. And so they're like, well, where are y'all from? Well, we're from, wherever. And it bridges gaps, and introduces people, to other people and places they may be, I don't know, scared of is the right term and not familiar with, certainly.
That is just wonderful.
It's those types of techniques that I think will help us to get to the next generations of folks who will have an interest in either the current blues music or the history of it.
You're definitely a mover and shaker, my man. So again, another shout out, because that creative energy and that perseverance on your part, and to, again, this is my big thing too, is that, not only you can create these moments of like, oh, how can you grab that young person's attention? Because, where it comes from and when you get it, it's either a thing or it's not. And, we remember back when we were young, you got hit with that in Elvis, and I was affected by Elvis to a degree when I was a kid and experienced it, but obviously you took your route, and it's obviously a great tool. It's a fantastic thing that you're doing down there, because from an international standpoint, right, you're bringing people out the doors and tapping into that demographic. So that's powerful. I really, I just I'm sitting here and I have like so many things I want to throw by you after we get off air, but also I got to get down there in April. So I just have to come down and experience what you're talking about. It sounds just fascinating.
So as part of the mission to sort of help organize and promote the blues from within, we have built it up to where we now have in Clarksdale, Mississippi, probably the only place on earth where it's actually true, 365 nights a year of live blues. There is live blues, at least one venue, even on like Christmas, Thanksgiving. Now we have to make that happen.
Yes.
But the point is we wanted it to be 365, so it's an easy message to market. We also, Juke Joint Festival is by far the biggest festival. But this year we had the equivalent of 20 festival type events in our little town of 13,000 people.
Wow.
Now, not all were successful, but still the point is we keep growing it, trying to expose people in different ways, have different takes on, some of the festivals have different angles, they might be more modern, or they might be all women in blues, or, which hopefully just opens up, the exposure and the interest to come to a place like a Clarksdale.
I just say this right now without going into detail. We're definitely going to have some conversation. So, listen, Cathead. So kind of has become a little landmark for the blues fans around the world. What was your original version for it, and what keeps it going today?
So it's the store I always wanted to walk into, but could never find. It's sort of all my blues and Mississippi and folk art interests
Awesome.
jammed in one, old building that I should absolutely do more work on. But, the aesthetic is like you're walking into an old general store or, I know when I opened up, I think I told the local reporter, it's like shopping in a juke joint because it sort of has that whole vibe,
Yeah.
I don't put a lot into uh, I don't dust much. I'll just tell you that. So I don't vacuum a lot. But you walk in, and it's
You know what you are? You're a modern day blues guy that go off the edges and to the side like this is my world. It's awesome.
It is definitely. One could say it's my world, I guess. But you walk in and you'll find all these books on blues, all these books on Mississippi culture and related. I've got any of the good, if they're good travel guides, I've got those. I mean, I want people to really get engaged. And it's fascinating in this day and age with, this thing we call the internet, Amazon and what have you, how many people will still buy a book or, well, frankly, vinyl records, of course, have come back. CDs have not gone away. And certainly, at least with my customer, cassettes have come back to a point, but they'll actually come and physically buy it. I think because we're sort of providing a service, they wouldn't know about this book. They wouldn't know about this album if we didn't have it there. And I tend to put stickers on things telling people how great they are if they are. But I think people, they like the authenticity of owning a real thing, not just the Kindle, nothing against Kindle, not just the MP3, nothing against streaming or whatever. But having the real thing and to be able to pick it up in a store and talk to somebody who can tell them some crazy story about the guy who did that album. I think it just really resonates with people more and more. And that's what I've always been interested in, is that, like the stories. And you talked about history books or history earlier. And it's crazy how growing up, I found history boring in school.
Mm-hmm.
History, I mean, what is boring about history? Nothing. It's a whole series of stories.
Right.
But it's the way it's presented a lot of times, in a textbook,
Right.
sidebar, I got to memorize the dates. It's like, but tell the story and people get engaged.
Yes. I mean, that's obviously that's the beauty and that's the success of these podcasts in general, because we're sharing stories. And I want to go back to when you talk about this in hand, right? I think people are longing. I think we, as the age we are, we know and identify what that brings of going out and, going to buy a book, going out and smelling the coffee and looking around and browsing and put your hands on different books, and to be around other people that, that social environment, and you can actually grab and buy something of substance in your hand, compared to like you can only imagine how this transfer of this generation that we have now that has gone, we have a full generation that is deep into just nothing but digital, living a life somewhere else other than really present right where they're at. And we know what all the challenges on social level and in relationships and in communication that is. And it's just it's a beautiful thing that I think it gets to a point where if the message is real, I think a lot of people realize it either sometime or next or sooner or later, hopefully, that it is that like, okay, go outside into your community and engage on that level of intimate exchange and get back to, sharing, smelling that food, sharing the music, which obviously it's a sign here that you're having people from all over the world to come and you're offering this experience that is not only experience that's firsthand and like in your face, and you can grab on stuff and take it home and you can look at it and feel it and get those stories about how that was delivered. It wasn't delivered to you, right? You found it, that social experience, and that will live. You'll remember that story the rest of your life and those experiences of getting away, right? What's vacation? We step away out of our existing world to go take a break and have a experience in a more of a neutral environment. And again, I applaud you, man. This is really exciting what you're doing. Shout out to Logan Elliott for referring me to you.
Absolutely.
I will tell you right now that any way that I can possibly support your mission, and we'll talk more off camera, but I'm a big blues guy. That's probably the main. You'll enjoy this. My first song that I learned on the drums was a Little Walter song.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what about Roger? You've been through the whole deal. Like, what advice would you give a young person inspired by the passion, especially related with music, art, and culture, but doesn't know how to turn into your life's work?
So first off, whether it's a young person or an older person, because I've seen it here we've had all kinds of folks in the last 2 decades move here to open businesses or be musicians, artists, different things.
I'm sure.
And you've got to do planning. You need to have a safety net. I mean, you need to really, I didn't just one day say, hey, you know what? I think I'll just move to Clarksdale.
Right.
Is there a building down there? I spent a year kind of planning for it, making sure that financially I could afford like 2 years if I made no money, that kind of thing. I could still exist. I actually took a small business course because I'd never really taken something like that. I'd never owned a business. So trying to be prepared, I did a business plan. I really bought a book for dummies is what I did. And I did like a 40-page business plan. And what I try to tell people is do something like it, because what you want is that 2 years after you've done whatever it is you're doing, you're not sitting there saying, man, I just didn't think of that. And it took me down.
Wow.
What you're trying to do with the business plan really is just figure out, well, what are all the problems? It's not supposed to be a rosy thing like, oh, look at this and this and this. This is all great. You're supposed to also say, well, what if this happens? Or,
right.
Well, what's your competition? Nowadays would be a whole lot different than when I first wrote it because of the internet. But just to make sure you can afford to do your dream at that moment in time.
Right.
If you can't, then I would say you set up a longer journey and figure out ways to do it. I came from a corporate kind of setting, so I was able to save up a little bit of money. And the other thing is too, nowadays more than ever, is to think about, I don't really ever plan to retire per se, but like retirement, quote unquote,
right.
401k, whatever you want to look at, but like be at least thinking about that. And the younger you start anything, doesn't even matter how much you're putting in, it grows. So just to be thinking about that, because you think you're young now, but you're going to get old if you're lucky.
Right.
And the same thing goes with healthcare. I have so many musician friends here. And of course, right now it's just such a mess trying to get affordable healthcare, but so many musician friends who won't even do it. And it's like, you've got to invest in yourself. Something is going to happen. I mean, it always does, So somewhere in there is some advice for younger folks.
Listen, that's a passionate response, and I appreciate that, Roger. Again, you're framing it up to be absolutely sensible, and I think part of that is, I can almost relate to when I was younger, where when I heard those messages, and at some times, and it's all kinds of range of levels that. Sometimes people get to a position where they're doing whatever they're doing, a situation they've been kind of born into and whatever, that they spend so much time just trying to survive and also dream. And then sometimes there's not that, what's the word I'm looking for? The ability to totally cover all the bases and then decide what that route you want to go to. And like when you talk about personal wellness and health, I've always put a really strong focus on that. And I really spent like probably most of my money when I was younger in trying to eat really good food and pay attention to my wellness. So no matter how much money I had in the bank later, I didn't want to work myself to a place where I was broken down in disease and not even a quality of life. And then I had to spend all my money to try to keep myself alive. So that was kind of like a perspective that maybe I took it too hardcore, but I've learned lessons, and I believe that music and storytelling and culture and, obviously what you're doing is just amazing. So, Roger, are you at all familiar? And we know that the act of, I know for sure, right? And from a neural standpoint, when you get your actively hands on an instrument and you play it and you've seen all these musicians, how do you have any ideas? I'm just curious. Right? We could redesign even we know that the arts and physical wellness in terms of a really focus on the young kids in school, right? You're supposed to learn how to balance a checkbook. But for me, my message, as my moniker is, I'm the Balance Professor, thebalanceprofessor.com. And my message is that there should be a huge focus on self-care. And like you talk about investment in your financial, but your self-care of like knowing what a proper posture is and stand tall and eat right and watch your, being educated at early age, an environment where it's enjoyable to learn all those details about self-care and health and wellness. And then also finances, right? And security and planning and business and that kind of thing. So I'm very involved in active-based learning. And I've been developing a program trying to get people's attention to say, especially now the where we've come to, the information age, and what we've been experiencing is socialization and communication, obviously, and collaboration with young folk. It's, being challenged. And there's only more generations coming from that digital world, not having the ability to go to your local blues Delta shop like you and experience those festivals and have that integrated, right? The world, think about this, Roger, it's amazing what you're doing. You're bringing the world to that population that's there, that has such a treasure. They don't even, some of them don't even realize the treasure that's there. And it's wonderful that you're there. You're building there, like saying, here, I want to be a part of this. I respect it and honor it. And here's what I have to offer. So again, the bounty I see is just amazing. So again, I just applaud you, because like you said, music is that creates just that ability for people just to kind of like, here's some tones, right? Here's some vibrations, relax, right? And let's just enjoy. We realize how our differences are what makes it most amazing to be, right, an American. And be in the greatest country in the world.
Particularly, I'll just say locals, for lack of a better description. Sometimes, folks will appreciate the fans who come from all over the U.S. and all over the world, but think about what it costs them. I have a couple that comes every year for Juke Joint Festival, Gunter and Gisela from Germany, and they used to stay for like the weekend, then it was a week, then it was 10 days, then it was 2 weeks. They stayed almost a month last April. And, it's easy to say, oh, wow, that's impressive. And, oh, that's crazy. It's like, yeah, but think about what they spent, because they're on vacation for a month and they had to fly over here. They've rented a car, so that's how important it was. They could have gone anywhere. They could have, traveled through Europe or gone to Tahiti or whatever. Normal people do. I don't even know. But, they chose to spend their valuable vacation time, and they're a little bit older. So, who knows, right here. And I think just that shows you how important this music and culture and place really is and can be if people kind of open up to it.
Yeah. I have to kind of conclude here with a thought. I just heard a little quick line about relish the life you are living. The chances and odds that you will even come into being are beyond comprehension. And everybody has that comment, like, oh, it goes quicker than you realize, right? It's like, you're damn right it does. And in being in that moment, in the now, and realizing that, music, arts, and culture, again, I go back to that. I believe that education needs to be, any form of arts is a form of expression, self-expression. It doesn't have to be the total center of the focus. It's a big, I think it needs to play like almost 30%, along with fitness there. Other 66% you want to say. That's how I'm passionate about. I think it is as a vehicle that makes healthy, well-rounded people. And if there's not a time for some radical rethinking of our education system, and the abilities that we have as a country to come together, as opposed to, be just back in each other's corner and just wanting to bicker. But again, what you're doing, I can't praise you enough, and thank you so much for your efforts, because I think it's a powerful thing, both patriotically, culturally, socially, and to be like, wow, this is definitely the American story. And you're just spouting that off to the world, and creating a vehicle which is super powerful. So I just want to thank you for that. And I just really want to thank you for being on today and sharing some of your story.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate talking about mentors. I've just been very lucky in life to have. Sometimes there were bosses, managers who were great, or the other thing is you can learn from the ones who are terrible, and I learned just as much from them. Honestly, how to navigate not only business but just life. It's like oh, that's a really horrible person. I do not want to be that.
That's funny. Yeah.
And then, the musicians here, particularly the older musicians who unfortunately have passed in the last few years, just the wisdom that came from them. And most did not get to go to school, could not read or write, but, they were very thoughtful. They had real, sometimes crazy life experiences. And you could get so much from it about the human experience. And I just feel really lucky to have moved here and done what I've done when I did, to be able to catch those last generations who, could tell you about plowing with a mule, picking cotton by hand, and these things that, they're in the history books. But for these folks, it's not history. It was their life.
Right.
And it informed the music and their art and their way of living, and just, their survival skills.
Yeah.
And, anything we can glean from that, just, it seems positive.
So tell me again, do you have the exact dates for the 2026 in April, your fest, and
Sure.
the name of it again?
Sure. So Juke Joint Festival, Juke. People can go to jukejointfestival.com. The Saturday, which is our main day and night, is April 11th. But we do have events Thursday, Friday, and Sunday as well. So it's really, and I do have some big news coming up, but I can't tell you yet. That even extends it more.
Nice.
So, chew on that, I guess. But,
Okay. So
but yeah, it's a long weekend of amazing blues and culture and people. And it's designed to make you really sink into Clarksdale.
nice.
And we couldn't do this festival in the same way anywhere else.
All right. Well, listen, wonderful. I know I have a special friend that April 11th is a special date for us. So I'm going to be getting down there. We're going to be getting down there sooner than later, my friend, but we'll definitely talk more. Thank you again so much, Roger, for sharing your story. And I wish you all the success and continue making wonderful waves of cultural awareness and music history.
Well, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it.
All right. All right, everybody. Till next time. Bye-bye. Good night.
Professor.